get started. Hi. Sit in the corner? No, you can join us right here, I think, or is that okay? That's like the special hot seat.
I'm looking for an statement from IUCN.
Pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining us. I'm happy to
Chacha, maybe it's better.
Or you. What's going on?
I need to start. Okay.
Introductory remark because there is.
Oh, you do? Okay, so we should get you started right away. So.
No,
He's doing the opening remarks.
Yeah,
and
so
then he's
we're
not
gonna
sitting on the panel. That's what.
I see what you mean. Gotcha. So I'll hand you over the microphone in a second. So. Chris, you tell me when. I could ask you to please take your seats. Carlo Fada, you're requested in the chair. And bring everybody else around you to have a seat. You don't want to miss this. Trust me. Marlene, bienvenida. Fantastic. Last session of the day, leaving the best for last. Right, Chris? Awesome. So good afternoon and welcome to this session on empowering communities to restore land and biodiversity through incentives and digital innovation. My name is Javier Mateo Vega and I'm the Global Director of Partnerships and Communications at the Alliance of Biodiversity in CGIAR, and I will be your moderator for this session. So as we know, land degradation, biodiversity loss, and the lack of income generating opportunities from sustainable land use practices pose significant threats to environmental sustainability, food security, and community livelihoods, reducing soil's ability to provide essential ecosystem services such as water filtration, carbon sequestration, and food production. And smallholder and rural communities are directly impacted by this, but at the same time have the greatest potential to drive restoration and conservation at scale in the long term with multiple co-benefits such as improved livelihoods and diets. Yet communities often face numerous barriers at multiple levels, including lack of incentives and solutions to implement and maintain such practices. And to this extent, Target 19 of the Global Biodiversity Framework calls for enhancing the role of collective actions, including community-based natural resource management and civil society cooperation and solidarity to increase conservation of biodiversity. With today's discussion, we aim to raise awareness on the linkages between land restoration and biodiversity conservation, especially tree species diversity, and the key role of smallholders to achieve both objectives. To do so, our speakers will present examples of incentives and support tools, including digital innovations that provide evidence-based recommendations and financial support to smallholder and rural communities, empowering them to engage in restoration and contribute to achieving land restoration and biodiversity conservation targets in social and environmentally sound ways. We will also hear about solutions to the challenges faced by smallholders and rural communities in the context of restoration and sustainable landscape management, and we will shape the conversation around innovative approaches and success cases to unlock and scale up investment in smallholder and community-led restoration. And to do all of this, and to start the setting the stage, I would like to ask Dr. Chetar Kumar, the Global Head of Forest and Grasslands Team at IUCN, for some opening remarks. Great to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation and the opportunity to speak at this really interesting event. So my name is Chetan Kumar. I'm the head of the Forest and Grasslands team of IUCN. And it is my pleasure to mention about this fantastic collaboration we have with Alliance Biodiversity and CGIAR, which is, I would say, rooted in our shared vision to address biodiversity loss, land degradation, and community resilience. This is really fantastic because we bring complementary strengths. IUCN, with its vast network of members, partner organizations, as well as our extensive work on restoration over several decades, combined with the research expertise as well as the focus on digital innovation, which is the thing that we want to promote as well, it brings down the multidimensional approach to restoration. Let me take a few moments to explain what we are doing on restoration and how this in particular, I would say initiative, not a project, because I'm certainly looking forward for it to continue over the years, fits within the scheme of things. So at IUCN, if I have to summarize what we do on restoration, I will say 4 Ps. So the first one is to pledge. So we work a lot, or we have been since 2011 with the government of Germany. We started this bond challenge, which is to mobilize political commitments from the government with the target of 350 million hectare under restoration by 2030. We already have about 210 million commitments, 210 million hectares of commitment. We still have 5 more years to go, so I hope we'll make it there. So the first one is the pledge part, then the plan. The planning part is where we work with different government agencies, national, subnational, to support planning of restoration interventions. As you know from all your experience, it's easy to say that we will pledge. When you get down to the doing how you do it, it's intersectoral collaboration, prioritization of trade-offs, and all those things come into the picture. So that's where the planning comes into. And we have worked so far with 36 government agencies, national, subnationals, through our restoration opportunities assessment methodology to support planning of restoration intervention, which includes not just the planning of intervention on the ground, but also looking at financial mobilization, stakeholder engagement, etc. And then plant part is where, and I'll talk more about, is then from planning to how you implement it. And that's the transition that we are making right now, and I'll talk a little bit about the Forest Landscape Restoration Hub that we have just started last year. So that's the third part, and then the proof is where monitoring comes into picture. You need to report. We have to be accountable. And our restoration barometer is one of the tools that we have been using at the national level to report progress on the bond challenge. So far, we have applied in 22 countries, and they have reported against a set of indicators which include area under hectare, livelihoods, etc. So about 8 indicators, action and impact indicators. So that's a kind of our focus. The most important part of transitioning from pledge, plan to plant or implement is the community-centric focus. You cannot achieve restoration without engaging, working with the community. And over the last 2 decades that we have worked in several contexts, of course, it's different in different entry points for restoration interventions. Somewhere conservation, somewhere food security, water, so there are different aspects. But what at least I have seen over the last 2 decades is that there is a shift, or there is a demand from not just community being part of planning process or part of, okay, we can do this together and you join us in this planning, but actually demanding, for example, resource allocations at the county level, at the subnational level, demanding for technology, working to develop those kind of, and that's where it's critical, because we need those tools, we need those essential frameworks which will empower these communities to make the restoration sustainable. And the second part of this is also making the finance available. And that is a big area of work that we are still, I would say there is a lot to be done. And there's 3 aspects of which I would highlight. One is we often see this, what we call mismatch in the ticket size. You have groups looking for $10,000 investment, $50,000 investment, but the private investor come in with $1 million. How do you, organize them? And the second one is we still don't have, there is need for more work to be done on the investable projects in restoration, which has the right mix of risks and returns. And that's where a lot of work needs to be done in terms of planning, working with the communities. And the third one, which I often talk about, is the repurposing of the domestic finance or domestic allocation to restoration. Through the work that we did on Barometer, we tracked how much funding is being spent on restoration actions. And we found that 60% actually comes from domestic. Only 10% comes from the international donor agencies, because the funding sits with Ministry of Forests, Ministry of Water. There's some fundings even with Ministry of Mining, because they have to do restoration. If all that could be repurposed and directed towards community-centric approach, we can achieve much bigger impact. And that's an area where more work needs to be done. So with all that approaches, we started, or rather, concerns, we started the FLR hub last year with funding from the German government. It's an ambitious initiative with the initial funding of 20 million from the German government, as well as plan to mobilize another 20 million through public and private funding. So overall 40 million with 6 pilot countries to start with, 3 in Latin America here. So Colombia is one of the countries, Brazil and Peru. And then in Africa, Tanzania, Uganda, and Madagascar. And these 6 countries were selected because they were ready for implementation when we started discussing about this hub. When I said ready, because they had gone through the planning, pledge, etc. process. An important part of this hub is what I was discussing with Chris this afternoon, is that it is a demand-driven process. The countries have to put the demand of what they would like to see in terms of accelerating implementation. And that's where I see the role for a lot of these innovative approaches to come in. And we don't want to do business as usual, because the hub is going to play a catalytic role. We are not there to provide 5 million to raise a nursery or 2 million, but something that can help catalyze an initial investment in developing a tool or scaling up, and then that can go to a next level. So that's our goal. And certainly I'm looking forward to discussing further with Chris about how we can integrate with these countries. So with that, I would like to close and really appreciate inviting me, and look forward to learning more about your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chetan. So pledge, plan, plant, prove, with a community-centric focus to achieve lasting restoration outcomes, but still big challenges with finance, investable projects, and repurposing domestic finance. So well noted. Thank you for those key messages. So now I'd like to switch over to our fantastic panel, and I'd like to introduce, and just please raise your hands and say hi to the crowd. We have Chris Kettle, the Principal Science and Tree Biodiversity for Resilient Landscapes at the Alliance of Biodiversity and CGIAR. Gabriela Orihuela, Trainer and Evaluator for the Global Biodiversity Standard, TGBS. Marlene Elias, Principal Scientist of Multifunctional Landscapes at the Alliance of Biodiversity and CGIAR. Mari Iringuru, Advocacy Officer associated with the Pelham, Kenya. And joining us online, I believe we have Sarala Kaling, who is, I think, very early in the morning for her. So we want to give her very special thanks, and she's a Senior Fellow and Regional Director at ATREE. Oh, there she is. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate this. You're getting a lot of waves and kudos here for your incredible commitment. So to start us off, I'd like to ask Chris if you could tell us a bit more about My Farm Trees and how it works, how it was developed, and what economic incentives it brings to farmers and potentially to municipalities where it is implemented. And before you answer, Chris, we just want to keep the panel dynamic and lively. So I would like to encourage other speakers to also jump in at any point if you want to. Just interrupt Chris and get at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. So thanks very much, Javier, and thanks, Chetan, for the great introduction, because I think it sets the scene really well. And I'm going to switch those questions, because I'm going to start by asking the why. Why was it developed? And the recognition that while there are huge political commitments to restoration globally, the capacity at the national level to deliver the biodiversity, particularly in the context of native indigenous tree species, is woefully mismatched to the political commitments that are being made in the context of restoration. So that's fundamentally one of the reasons why we developed this program of work. And the second really important reason why we developed this program of work is because we recognize that if we want particularly to encourage smallholder farmers to increase native trees on their lands, while they may benefit in the long term, they're going to really need incentives to actually be able to encourage to grow those trees that might take some time to demonstrate the benefits to them in the immediate future. So that's really where the background came from. Now, how does the My Farm Trees platform work is actually quite simple. It's basically a mobile phone app, and it's simple in the context that what we're using it for is to track the seed system to be able to support improve nursery infrastructure with community-based nurseries, and then to use that platform to monitor and evaluate trees that are being planted by smallholder farmers. Now that's relatively simple to do with a mobile phone platform. It uses geolocated photographs, and the farmers can, in many cases, for example, in West Kenya, have a very high rate of penetration of smartphones. Now, the more sophisticated and clever part of this is we're actually using digital payments and blockchain to verify payments as the incentive system to those farmers. So those farmers that are monitoring and evaluating the trees that are on their farm, we not only will be able to verify the quality of the planting material, and the farmers will directly receive an incentive to do that. So that's how it works in a nutshell. And why the last question really is about where are the economic incentives. So I just want to move and explain that a little bit more. So this here is Lawrence, who is a smallholder farmer from West Kenya in CGIAR County. And before we actually came to this community, he was already collecting seeds and propagating indigenous trees on his farm. He was really passionate about it. But what the My Farm Trees platform does is actually enables him to embed the best science into what he's doing, to make sure when he does his seed collection, he's capturing the genetic diversity that's necessary to make sure that that planting material is adaptive and resilient to climate change. And also to make sure he's collecting the tree species that are going to be most suitable for different contexts locally, which are going to deliver nutrition, is going to deliver carbon, biodiversity, pollination, many other ecosystem services, and provide him with additional benefits. But more importantly, the platform enables him to connect with people who want to buy the seedlings from him. So he's connected to a market, he's able to verify the quality of his material, and then the people who are buying from him know that this is actually the best possible material they could have of the species they would like. In addition, and this is Rose, who's another smallholder farmer, she's from CGIAR County, which is an area that really suffers extensively from flooding. And what she's realizing is that the tree cover in this area is actually a major consequence of why flooding is a big problem, because the interception in the landscape is heavily reduced, and therefore there's a lack of tree cover, and water movement through the landscape is increasing the frequency of this flooding. In addition, it's also a consequence of local microclimate, and I'm sure everyone in the room appreciates, especially walking around the car park here this week, that trees have a massive impact. Everyone was aggregating to the fences where the cool air was. And so trees on farm also provide those other ecosystem services. And in addition to that, so Mary is able to monitor the trees on her farm, but also receive directly a payment through the platform that the trees she's growing. So far we've piloted the program of work across about 4,000 farmers in Kenya and Cameroon, and we have not only have the blockchain ledger tracking the origins of that material, but linked to the payments for each individual farmer. So it provides incredible scalable solution to deliver incentives economically, and more importantly, to make sure that they're growing trees that in perpetuity will deliver them benefits. So I think that's a quick summary of the My Farm Trees platform, and we can discuss it in more detail.
That is fantastic. We're going to throw a question at you right off the bat. So you're at 4,000 farmers in Cameroon and Kenya. How do you double that? How do you get an order, 2 orders of magnitude greater?
Okay, so the great thing about this is that the technology and the data is now is available. So we have all the infrastructure for the species recommendation. We have the platform in place. What we really need now is the investment. We need the financing to flow through to the farmers. So what we're starting to do now is to look at what are the different vehicles in which we can start to flow those investments. And there are a number of different ways. I've been having the most inspiring conversations throughout the Congress about sovereign debt funds, about how we can integrate with different value chains. For example, smallholder farmers who are producing cocoa or tea or coffee can have it integrated into their sustainable value chain payments. But then also we could include carbon benefits, so carbon funding, biodiversity credits, linked to different types of blended finance. So where we're really going now is to look how we can integrate extensive blended finance through the platform to create long-term incentives to farmers. And maybe I just add one of the things that's really clever about this is what happens in the platform is that farmers accumulate points for all of the services they're doing in terms of restoration, and they can directly translate those points into hard currency. So there's a digital wallet. For example, in Kenya, we're using M-Pesa, so the farmers can translate those points they accumulate from the ecosystem services they provide directly into hard currency.
Fantastic, Chris. Thanks so much for that. And if there are any funders in the room, we're locking the doors before you leave, so you got to talk to Chris. Just be on alert. You've been warned. So, Marlene, let me shift over to you. Based also what you've heard from Chris and Chetan before, how does the gender play a role in decision-making for the use and benefits from technologies in local communities?
Thank you, Javier. And I guess I'll shift a bit to take us back. I don't know if you have, is it possible to put another slide? I did submit a slide a bit late. Okay, thank you. So just, to the idea of any work, any initiative that we do needing to really begin with understanding the human dimensions of restoration, which may sound obvious, but has not been historically the way a lot of our organizations even have worked with communities. So those human dimensions are really about how the human system interfaces with the ecological system. And that's very broad. It can be, what are the human drivers of degradation? What are the motivations for humans to restore? How do they want to restore? What are the outcomes of restoration on humans? So it's quite broad. And I've put this up here just because we did recently release a report under the leadership of Stephanie Mansourian that really looks at those human dimensions and the importance of really, taking a close look at those, understanding those carefully and addressing those before we actually engage with, and while throughout the entire process of engagement with communities. And we've also just put out a brief that looks at how those human dimensions intersect with, or the importance of considering those human dimensions when we're thinking about targets 2, 3, and pretty well the entire global biodiversity framework. So with that, of course, gender is transversal to those human dimensions. So we know that women and men and all genders use natural resources differently. They may care about different functions, ecological functions. They have different access to resources, including land, very importantly when we're talking about restoration, trees, and when it comes to technologies as well. They may have different preferences for tree species when it comes to restoration as well. So really when we're thinking about technologies, it's about understanding this gendered use of technology, their gendered capacities to access technology. If we're thinking about mobile phones, for example, access to smartphones may be differentiated, usually is differentiated in rural areas. Literacy, digital fluency as well. So it's being able to address all of those issues, and thinking also about the norms around the use of technology. So in some cases, women may not be encouraged or able to engage with certain technologies because it's sanctioned in their communities. Whereas in others, technology can really open up spaces for women to take a more leadership role, a more prominent role, to receive more of the benefits from restoration in their communities. So really understanding those issues. There are, of course, in addition to technologies, when we're thinking about restoration from a gender perspective, it's not just the technology, but the technology comes within a human system, socio-ecological system. So it's not only about having access to the technology, but do women then have access and rights over the land to use the technology for restoration, or over seedlings, or over trees and so on. So thinking about all of that. So there are just a few points that I have here in terms of thinking through the use of technology and gender. So one is, the technology, is it driven by, or the necessity for ensuring that it's driven by the priorities of the communities. Sometimes, it's sort of like a hammer looking for a nail, or a solution looking for a problem. So what do the communities actually want? And within that, what do women want in terms of technologies? Are we addressing the right issues with our technologies? Which technologies already exist within communities, and which ones women already have access to that they may also wish to amplify? And how do we also, if we do develop new technologies, how do we build on what already exists and on existing, capacities and so on, and how do we design so that we're able to really create a product that reflects the needs and the priorities of women. How do we create new opportunities for women through technologies? For example, the idea of mobile money, which can put money right into women's hands, and that can be really transformative. So there are a lot of opportunities, but also some risks that we have to be aware of. Accessibility, of course, in terms of cost, but also physical accessibility, other kinds of complementary aspects that need to be there to enable women to use technologies and capacities. And then, what kind of other support might women and men in communities need to be? What accompaniment do they need in order to be able to use those properly? One more, addressing the need for complementary resources. I mentioned land, other resources, finance, access to inputs and so on that women may not have the same access to as men. So it's really thinking about technology as part of a much broader package that needs to be carefully considered from a gender perspective and from a people-centered perspective, essentially, within which, of course, gender relations are a very prominent dimension. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much, Marlene. So human dimensions, restoration, and gendered lens on the technology, the capacities to access technology, digital literacy, fluency, and all of these other sort of enabling conditions that are often not necessarily in place to adopt gendered approaches. You mentioned risks. Could you elaborate on some of those risks?
Also, it's not just related to technologies, but to restoration, maybe more broadly. One important risk is that women may use lands that are not they don't have ownership over. And of course, when restoration changes the value of land and the use of land, and sometimes often the titling of land, it's really ensuring that they're not losing access to their basic, to lands on which they depend for basic livelihoods, their basic livelihoods. And then of course, when you're commercializing products, there are sometimes risks that you may be, a product which may have been under women's care and women's control. Once you've got a more commercial, if you're restoring with products that may then increase the value of the product, it may then shift into men's hands. Anyway, I think there are several aspects that need to be considered, and thinking, engaging in a really meaningful way, respectful, trusting way with the communities is the way that you're going to be surfacing those kinds of concerns and possibilities, and also that you'll be able to mitigate those kinds of possibilities of risks. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Marlene. We actually have seats here in the front if anybody wants to take a seat. I promise Chris does not bite, or at least not hard usually. So there's space up here. And if there's anybody has space next to them, just raise your hands, and we're happy.
Talking from experience, have you?
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. No question about that. So thank you so much, Marlene. So I would like to go now a bit more into the country level perspective and ask Mary, as a policy specialist in agroecological practice in Kenya, what linkages do you see between policy and digital innovation for community-led restoration through tree planting in farms? So over to you, Mary. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. I'll start by saying that policy should be informed, should be data-driven, should be evidence-based to address a specific need. And one of the challenges that we always have as policy actor is evidence and information, in which in this digital and use of technology and innovation, I see an opportunity where adequate information will be provided that will inform policy to address a specific need. In the agriculture setup, I see digital technology assisting in the whole food system, from production, processing, and even in delivering the food on the plate. And these need to be well considered while coming up with the policy. But beyond supporting the policy process, I see digital information being used by also the extension service providers. But there's a question that you posed about the risks that comes with this digital era that we are in, especially when it comes to data. I see there are data that will be collected, data that will be processed, and data that will be used. So we need frameworks that protect these data at the national level, like who owns this data, who is in control of this data that is collected, and who influences the use of this information that is shared by the farmer during the restoration. And mostly we find at the national level, let me take the case of Kenya, we lack regulations that are protecting data, especially in the agriculture sector, and more so information that are related to seeds. And a lot of seeds are being lost at the community level and other uses where community are not involved. So policy is key, especially in the protection in terms of the ownership, sovereignty of those seeds, and also the privacy of the seed, especially when it is community-owned seed. And here we are collecting information that we are sharing. And policy framework is key, and policy enables also the adoption of particular technologies or innovation. But it comes with enabling environment, building the capacity not only of the farmers, but also the policy actors to understand the technologies and the innovations that are there to be able to frame the policies as required. And with these, there is that efficiency in the formulation as well as the implementation. When it comes to incentives, in Kenya, we had a review of the Climate Change Act 2016 to include issues of incentives. I don't know whether I'm allowed to ask Chris a question at this point.
Could you please do so?
Yes,
I think he's
Chris,
dying to answer one. Please
you
go
mentioned that, I understand the process. I'm in Kenya, I work also in CGIAR County. I know the process that farmers, yes, they receive their payment through M-Pesa. My question is, how involved are smallholder farmers in determining that this is the amount that you're going to be paid? Are they consulted? Because this is a buy and selling. Are they part of the decision that is made on the rate that they are paid?
No, that's a
Thank
great,
you.
great question, Marion. Thanks very much. So the short answer is yes, of course, they are consulted, and the payments are not uniform. So the payments are really dependent on many things. The payments are dependent on what the species are, what the investment is of the farmer, how difficult it is for a farmer to grow the trees on land. So, for example, in North Turkana, where we're working, the challenges are much greater in cultivating trees than they are in West Kenya. And so those payments are given proportionately based on the context locally and based on consultation with the farmer. So I can't give you the exact figures of what we're paying at the moment, because this is something that's being finalized right now in terms of the payments, but it is based both on consultation and based on the context locally of the farmer and on the ecosystem service provision and the type. For example, let me give an example. In West Kenya at the moment, as you well know, most farmers grow eucalyptus and acacia. And they're growing those because they're cutting them to burn for fuel wood. And so that has a very little contribution to the climate mitigation, because that wood is being grown for 2 to 3 years, then being cut and burned. And so that if a farmer wants to grow that, then the payment would be much lower than a farmer's going to invest in some fruit trees that are going to persist, or a timber species where that timber is going to lock up carbon in a much longer time frame. But it also is based upon the farmer's level of effort and the opportunity cost lost to them. So one of the things that's really important to understand is that we're integrating this with planning on the farm. farm. So the farmers map their farms, and without going into too much detail, what we're able to do is support them in actually planting the trees in the places which is not going to compromise their food production, but is going to add improved soil health, improved local climate, but and provide them with other healthy foods in the long term. So our colleague Barbara Vincetti, for example, has done a whole range of nutritionally sensitive restoration profiling in several sub-Saharan African countries, including a lot of work in Burkina Faso, and we integrate all that work into the way that the species recommendations are done. And I won't keep talking, so I don't want to dominate that. But we've done a huge amount of work about which species are most suitable in which location, and which will be most adaptive to climate change as well, through the diversity for restoration tool.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. So we appreciate your insights on the need for policy to be data-driven. Raised some very good points in terms of who owns, controls, and influences the use of data, and the perils of having a dearth of regulations for data protection, but also the critical role of policy in driving the adoption of certain technologies. So thank you for bringing these very valuable points. And to keep the discussion at the country and local level, I'd like to invite Sarala, if we can make sure that she's on the screen. And hopefully she's by now had a couple of coffees. There she is. And as a local organization that works on conservation and restoration, what technology innovation do you use, and what would you like to see implemented? Sarala, over to you.
And I would like to express my gratitude to Alliance for Biodiversity and International and CIAT for giving A3 the opportunity. Just a little bit background. We are a national organization, and A3 stands for Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment. I think in the past, we have been working a lot on restoration in different parts of India. And today I will talk mostly about the Himalayan, the work that we are doing in the Eastern Himalayas, which is in the northeast part of the country. So after many years of work, actually, we came up with key principles of ecosystem restoration for ourselves. I mean, an internal document to guide ourselves, looking at our experiences and looking at the ethical considerations, the social justice and inclusivity issues and all that. So we've started a program which is known as the Mountains to Mangroves Initiative. So it was initiated by Conservation International. And there are partners who are involved, several partners who are involved in the landscape within, and it's a regional program in South Asia. So in the Eastern Himalayas, so Bhutan, Nepal, India, Bangladesh are involved, and we are also involved in this. I think in terms of using technology and how and especially what sort of technology, what technology innovations we use, I would like to say that some of the, first I will just try to talk about the limitations of using technology. We try to use that among the communities. And one, of course, is the affordability of having a smartphone, because most of these technologies will run on at least a very, a smartphone is at least needed as a tool. The other is, especially being in the mountains, though in India, you hardly have to pay anything for internet charges. It's very, very cheap. It's extremely cheap, but again, the connectivity is in the mountains. And I think somebody else also mentioned literacy, the ability to use the apps at a certain generational level, who are particularly specifically involved in doing restoration work in the field. So here, I think the younger people, the youth, students, young farmers, young smallholders, the next generation, younger people, I think we are trying to use a lot of technology with them. So as we go around looking for places that need to be restored in the landscape, we do a lot of work through, of course, remote sensing and GIS at our level. But again, bringing that down to the communities, we have to do a lot of community-based mapping, basically going there in the field, But again, using simple tools, simple mapping tools, the community tell us, and we use them very simply, just GIS or even QGIS kind of tools. But the communities are there to identify and help us actually apply these tools. Although they may not, the generation now may not be able to, in their affordability, connectivity, or even literacy levels to actually be taking the GPS points and all that. But our aim is to involve more and more young people who work with the team in the field with us and are able to use these technologies that are already there, and they have smartphones, and they know some of these tools and the apps that can be used. So that is what we use. For monitoring restoration sites, we are using very simple a format which is known as the Open Data Kit, which was actually started by Google. So we are using that, but also simplifying it quite a bit so that it's not a very, very technically heavy tool to be used. And a lot of work is also being done by the citizen science tools like the iNaturalist, especially to document, when you set up a baseline of species, flora and faunal species that are already there, re-restoration, and also post-restoration. So there we involve a lot of communities and do a lot of workshops and trainings and more one-to-one guiding them and supervising them to be able to also be able to document in iNaturalist, which is also a very, very simple tool and just requires a little bit of good internet. So there too, we are facing a little bit of challenges, in the sense a lot of farmer level, small farmer owners at a certain generation or age still do not have email accounts. So that also proves to be sometimes a limitation to them. One of the things that we found out, which is really good, and which this program, this initiative, Mountains to Mangroves, does with a communication team, a separate entity, which is known as Plug TV. It is a Mumbai-based organization. They were able to come over and help the young people from the community in being able to document restoration, what it means for them, how do they value the landscape, why do they value restoration, and also some of the memory of saying how it was and how it's going to be, and their own aspiration. And there, I think the mobile phone has, and the photography technique, the video documentation technique, and posting it using social media, using their own videos, reels, I think that has been also a very important thing. And I think we will take that forward more and more with the young people. But also helping the generation now to train them, to have workshops with them, and we are using that also. But in future, I think we really, as a tree organization, we would really also want to have something like, an AI system where we have a lot of information from our work, case studies from all over India, and someone who really wants to start doing restoration can ask those questions like we do in sort of chat GPT kind of a mode, and say that, okay, here's a plot of land that I used to do slash and burn. I would want to, sort of restore it now. How would I be able to do that? And we have a bunch of information based on what we are feeding it as a tree through the various, evidence-based work that we have done, practices that we have done, papers that we have, and things like that. So in the future, hopefully we'll have that to also help communities access that, probably have it in local languages, probably have it on a simple phone kind of a thing, so that more and more communities can come together, use these technologies to also scale up how to do restoration in different ecosystems that we have in this country, or wherever we are working. Also is a lot of it is through different altitudinal systems. So suppose I'm a landowner in a temperate sort of a region, so I should be able to ask these questions and get feedback saying that, okay, this is how you start, how you prepare the land. This could be your reference forest. This is what you should look for, your baseline. Hopefully in future we can use the technology or AI or something like that to come up with helping communities and scaling up the work that we do. Thank you.
Sarah, I appreciate that. And wonderful to hear about the way that H3 is bridging technologies, the focus on gender, the acknowledgement of sort of these issues of connectivity, affordability, and literacy, and really this nice work in terms of conducting these exercises to value the landscape and the restoration process itself. It really sounds fantastic. Would you like to ask Chris or anybody else on the panel a question? Mary did, and so we welcome that. If not, we can do it for later on. So, off the hot seat. Sounds good. Okay, moving on. So thanks so much, Sarah, for that fantastic overview. And so now we're moving on to Gabriela, last but not least in our panel. So Gabriela, could you please discuss about the role of technological innovation for generating results from biodiversity monitoring led by local communities?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much. My name is Gabriela Orihuela, and I come from Peru. I'm representing the Global Biodiversity Standard with the Peru Hub. So I see the challenges that we have with technology. So I'm just going to share some of the a case study. I think involves both. We were chatting a little bit before we came in, and involves that technology issue and gender that we want and need to incorporate in the restoration process. So the global biodiversity, raise your hand who knows about the global biodiversity standard, or have you heard about us this week? Okay, thank you. That's good to see so many hands. So, but for the ones that don't know about the global biodiversity standard, we are a new certification for restoration projects. And it's a type of certification that has been born from the scientific community. So it comes from the knowledge of the Society for Restoration Ecology, and it gathers the scientific knowledge of botanists around the world, from botanic gardens and hand of the Botanic Garden Conservation International, with over 900 botanic gardens across the world. So starting from there, we have the knowledge of the botanists, and we have the knowledge of the restoration specialists. And we bring that to the sites, to the different sites of restoration, and we put it together with the local knowledge, with the local communities, and we work that from there. So one of our case studies, pilots that we ran here in Colombia a few weeks ago, we have the chance to work with a local non-profit organization that has been working with local communities from different municipalities. And this particular municipality, and they call it here La Veredas La Ortiga, and the community name Pumamaki, Asociación Pumamaki, Asociación Agroecológica Pumamaki. And they have shown us how they have been working from 30 years ago doing restoration because they wanted to protect the source of water. So they have, for their communities, because they have clear up all the high areas of the Andean forest, and they put potreros, all the cattle ranching over there, and they realized that they were losing water. So they felt the need of recovering that. So they started, before all this movement of restoration started, they organized themselves, and they work with the local gobierno regional, the regional government, and the municipalities to have capacity development together and to start restoration project. They were trained, they received workshops in seed collection, identifying the mother trees, getting the seed collection, seed banking, propagation, nursery management, and planting. They have done a wonderful job. But when we go and certify, we are kind of auditors. So we arrive and we say, okay, we're going to check all these 8 criteria that we have. We have 21 sub-attributes, and we have to get data on that, right? To make sure that the right plants are being planted in the right place, right? That's our challenge as a restoration process. So we go to the site, and then when we talk and we ask, one of the things that they were missing 30 years ago, there's no more cell phones, there were no apps. There were when we ask for records of planting, we get handwritten sheets, loose sheets that we have to get together to see the counting and how many trees they have counted, 100 here, 50 here, and who planted. Oh yeah, so and Mrs. So. So yeah, the information is there. Where are the mother plants? So all this data that Chris have mentioned is there. So there's evidence, but it's not in a systematic way. So when we are talking about the payment for one of the plants being geo-referenced, right? We are talking about that the payment goes for each plant geo-referenced in site, and planted, and they receive an income for that. Where is this plant? Oh yeah, no, we plant a group, and we got a record of more or less here, right? We go into the field, and we're trying to find the trees, and it's hard. So, just to mention that, an app like this, and I didn't know about this app, so I'm finding out this. This comes in hands to this project and so many other projects. I can see it coming. And on the other hand, women. These communities, not only this one, but another one that we visit, they were led by women. 24 members in the association, 20 were women and 4 were men. 20 women in charge of making calendars, who's going to be collecting the seeds, who's going to be planting, who's going to be sowing, who's going to be putting the irrigation system on, right? Who's going to be preparing the byproducts. They prepare wine, they collect the honeybees, they take it to the market, they organize. So the core, the core of these local communities are driven by women, and I just want to mention that. So putting together, you also mentioned that there's some challenges sometimes for women to do this. I think now women are more prepared and more into apps, and the cell phones and communications. I think I don't foresee a big problem in that side, but I think it's a great tool. So just to share that, I've seen this. I've seen similar things in Bolivia too, and we hope to see more projects in Peru too. To work with the communities is very strong. There are different communities in La Selva, in the tropical rainforest, and in the Andes being done. So we are looking forward to reach out to get to know these projects and to apply technology like this. That is so. Question for Chris. So how much there's a cost for this application? Can they easily download it? Do they need an iPhone, or is it what's the platform that they need on?
Okay, thanks, Gabriela. That's nearly always the first question. So, in fact, and we have Anton here, who's actually the technical lead on My Farm Trees, who developed the platform with his team. But the reality is that the app is completely downloadable and free. Some of the challenges are you have to have a Google Play account at the moment, but it can operate on any operating system. And it's actually developed as a web-based interface, which is much more flexible and adaptable. Within the app. So from a technology point of view, I think it's incredibly accessible. Of course, there are challenges with different mobile phones. You need to have a mobile phone that has sufficient power to be able to run the app. You also need to have a mobile phone that has a GPS capacity. The most important thing to know is it doesn't need internet. So the app actually functions without internet. You need to have the internet if you want to download the maps and other things, but the whole thing operates without any connectivity. And you can, depending on, and there, perhaps I should really emphasize, which is a really crucial point, that this platform was really co-developed with users. So it was completely user-centric designed. We went out and we worked with different communities and we worked through the process and looked at how it would be adaptable. And it's incredibly user intuitive. It has these kind of color-coded elements you have to go through, and if you don't get to an element, it doesn't let you go to the next stage. Things don't go green, so you can move forward. It's operable within the language of the phone, so it's completely translatable to different languages. Perhaps the one thing we realise is that literacy is always going to be a bit of a challenge. So we started thinking out how can we use voice recognition as an alternative, and can we use AI-based approaches to make this even more accessible to other people. But we're 2 years in, or 2.5 years into this, and this is going to evolve over time. But the technology is always adaptable to local context, and I can tell a brief kind of anecdotal story. We've just started deploying this with orang asli in the northern border of Malaysia and Thailand, and within 15 minutes one of the orang asli could go out and do a seed collection and actually do all of the documentation, and he doesn't speak English and it isn't in his local language, but he could follow through the different components after only a few minutes of playing with the app. And he was a 20-year-old local forest orang asli.
No, thank you, Chris. And I foresee this app being used by the communities. They're going to be embracing this, and it's a necessity and I'm just thankful that it's out there. We work with the global biodiversity standards in 15 countries right now. We have 15 hubs, so not only Latin America, but we also are in Asia, in Africa, and India. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share in this.
Thank you, Gabriela. You asked the question I was about to ask in terms of your geographic coverage, and thank you for asking Chris a question as well. Great to hear about the Global Biodiversity Standard, and also thank you for acknowledging sort of the different ways of knowing and the integration of different ways of knowing in terms of the experts, but also the community-led knowledge. I mean, so much to learn from a community that's been doing restoration for 30 years, right? Lots of learning from there. So we're now moving over to the next section, and thanks to our panelists, you now are all going to be on the hot seat. Because we're opening up for questions from the audience, and I can see people just jumping, ready to jump out of their seats. So we're going to hand the microphone over, and if anybody has any questions, this is the time to do so. First taker.
Thank you very much. My name is John Garcia from BioVision Foundation. I was just wondering, so Chris, you mentioned that it was one of the ideas is to start thinking about or reflecting with the farmers or helping or even listen to the reflections on what are the transitions they want to see, for example, from systems that are dominated for eucalyptus and other perhaps introduced species that have a use at the moment to other more indigenous or native trees. Do you have figures on how that transition is going? How many of those changes have you observing, or really, like what was the tangible, let's say, conservation benefit to native species that the project may have?
Thanks, John. That's a great question. So first of all, I shouldn't start these answers with first of all, should I? Because it really highlights I'm going to talk for 5 minutes. So we do species preference assessments with the communities first to understand really what their preferences are in terms of species and identify which species are high priority, why, and what benefits they would bring. But perhaps more importantly than that, we actually have been doing research alongside this whole exercise of developing the platform. So, in fact, this platform is in part of what we call the Nature Positive initiative within the CGIAR. So it's a whole stream of work across multiple countries, and and I was leading the work on restoration within that Nature Positive initiative. And in fact, we had a PhD student working alongside this project as it was being implemented in Kenya. And she was looking, using social science approaches, using the theory of planned behavior to understand what influences smallholder farmers to want to increase trees on her farm. So actually, there's a paper that's just been second round submitted, which actually addresses this question exactly. What what are the motivations for farmers, why they make those decisions, how it differs across the demographic, and what are the species they prefer, that their preferences are for, and why. And there's some really, really fascinating results coming out of that work that actually show a couple of things. Yes, of course, your level of education, your level of income makes a huge difference. But the other thing that's really interesting is the influence of your neighbours. So actually, neighbouring farmers who are doing something has a big influence on whether another farmer wants to do it. And I think that's one of the reasons why this platform is so powerful, because it provides this kind of communication between farmers as well. So we could go on again to talk about My GeoFarm, which this app is built into, which allows peer-to-peer exchange between farmers. And that shows that actually farmers seeing what other farmers are doing and seeing what trees they're planting has a huge influence on what they are going to do. And if you raise awareness of the benefits of those different indigenous trees, then you actually can actually have transformation in what they're going to choose to plant. But all that aside, I just want to emphasize the point that accessibility of planting material is the most crucial thing, because what we know is at the moment there's a massive bottleneck, and which is why giving the capacity for farmers to engage in nurseries and seed collection is critical to increasing the availability of those options. And we want to get those options available before we lose them, because we're not just talking about restoration here, we're talking about conserving those species as well. Many of those indigenous fruit trees or indigenous species that offer medicinal options or forage or are important for pollination, we need to make sure we're getting access to those before they lose. In the case of Kenya, for example, West Kenya, there's a lot of its forest gone. And we need to be able to make sure that we get that material conserved and integrated into current landscapes.
Thanks so much, Chris. Next question.
Yeah, hi. I'm Rachel. I'm working for Caring, which is a corporate. And I was just curious, I have two questions. I didn't catch, where is the money coming from for paying to put the trees in? And I also didn't catch, and I think that maybe someone mentioned a tool that I'm not aware of. What kinds of measurements are you capturing so that we know how those restoration efforts are actually maybe going to help the water or whatever? Just can you develop a little, please?
Okay, so at the moment, the payments within this first phase pilot, the funding is coming from the Global Environment Facility. So this is effectively program funds. So we had the $2 million investment from the Global Environment Facility that was to pilot the program of work. But we're already starting to discuss with a whole range, and I think maybe you weren't here when we had the discussion at the beginning, that we're looking at all kinds of different streams of blended finance that will contribute to this, both carbon and biodiversity-based funds, but also blended finance from philanthropy, coupled with value chain from retailers, processors in different value chains, like cocoa, coffee, that could integrate into this. The second point is about the monitoring. So fundamentally, we're using geolocated photos and species identification as the primary component. So this is not part of a carbon evaluation platform, for example. And what we are thinking about now is how we can actually use that data for some of those things or enhance that part of the platform. But it's also, what's really strong about the platform, it can feed into existing carbon monitoring frameworks because it generates lots of ground-based data that can be then linked to remote data. So we can use existing remote data on canopy cover, but we can actually say, okay, what species is that from the photo-located data, and what's the size of the trees? For example, with the photos, you can have simple metrics to understand what the size of stems are within the landscape, and couple those together. And then related to your point about, the role it has in water, for example, My Farm Trees is linked to another tool we have, which is called Diversity for Restoration, which actually uses a huge database of species trait data. So what we have there is massive amount of data on each individual species, coupled with their species distribution data, so we can and linked to climate model data, so we know which species traits are most relevant, but we also know which species is going to be adapted to current and future climate. So this links to the points about the resilience of these trees being selected to be the right species, not only species, but actually lower than that at the genotype level, because we link to seed zones and understand which genotypes are going to be mixed to be most adapted to future climate as well.
But so does that mean that you're actually seeing, are you getting toward outcome-based results in terms of the actual restoration?
So I would say it's very early days to get outcome-based results. We started this program of work 2 years ago. At the moment, we've done about 250,000 plantings, right? So, but this is something that will scale very quickly. And for me, the most exciting thing about this, recognizing all issues of data is, I'm a forest ecologist, so I'm not a tech expert like Anton. So what I'm really, really interested in is to understand what influences what a species does over long time. And what this will do will generate huge amounts of data saying, okay, these species are doing this over this time, these species are surviving really well. And when we're dealing with wild, unimproved, wild species of tree, we don't have provenance trials, we don't have any of this data. And so it integrates that capacity to understand that within the restoration framework, and we can start to accumulate that knowledge and adjust our decision making as we collect the data.
Just to add that the data that we are taking also from the field, so similar to the work with Chris, we evaluate the restoration sites with 8 criteria. So we have to look into the ecosystem integrity. We see data in flora and fauna, in soil and water. We see the flow, the gene flow as well, corridors. And also we measure the level of protection of the area, how protected is the area. We also work in national protected areas, so that's crucial, that's very important. And also how the farmers and the local site owners protect the restoration work that has been so hard for them. But if the neighbor has cattle, for example, you have to protect that. And so there's usually an agreement when you start supporting the programs that they're going to be fencing that area, for example. So monitoring is crucial. So we also include the monitor the process on that. So and we have scoring system. So we have the rapid assessment that we do at the site. It will take a photo. An instant photo of what's going on, and also we're going to compare with a reference system that is close by. So a reference system, baseline data, and also satellite imaging that we're working with remote sensing to see all the changes, canopy cover, and humidity, and all the indexes that we can get. So that brings out a scoring so we can know how efficient has been the restoration project. And then with that, we have a tier, and then we have certification. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Could I ask a question? And maybe this is for Marlene. I mean, listening to Gabriela, we're looking at a number of criteria that are more technical in nature. What is missing from a gendered lens? Like, what should the global biodiversity standard should be thinking about from a gendered lens in this case, considering everything you already shared with us, right? So, any thoughts about that?
Me? Yeah. Well, yeah. I think it was me, but I know you did mention to me earlier that there was an equity criteria, so I wonder if you want to add that.
Yes, I forgot, of course, to mention one of the criteria 3. Thank you so much, Malice. What's important here tonight is the social component. So we've been working with Plan Vivo to develop the training and the data of how do we work with local communities, how do we do the interviews, how can we reach to them, and we talk to them and gather the data that is important to see how effective, how benefits are being shared, how equal gender equality, jobs, production, stakeholders also we consider secondary and tertiary stakeholders, and how are their benefit from the chain, from the action chain. So yes, it is very important, the social component, and I think that's what makes difference the global biodiversity standard, that not also include all the scientific part, all the traditional knowledge, but the social component is really important to see the sustainability on the local community.
Great, thank you for clarifying that.
Yes.
Fidel.
Thank you very much. My name is Fidel Chiriboga. I also work for Alliance Biodiversity CIAT. My question is to Mary and Sarah, if she's still there. And it's related to buy-in to the adoption capacity from the public sector. Because all the conversations, all the narratives that we had so far is when people are prone to using technology. But on the public sector and also in the local communities, there might be a lot of people who are not prone, that are a little bit shy, or they don't really have reached to that level that they would like to implement technology, change their status quo, change their processes. So how do you do is the question. What have you seen that is possible to do to change their perspectives and make people more prone to use technology for making their work more efficient from the public sector, and if Sarah is still there, from the local communities?
Thank you. From the policy actors' perspective, they will be really interested to know, is it working? Is it real? And what impact will it bring? And the question will first be, okay, technology, what economic implication will it have? Will it bring any positive change? And how is it contributing to the current government agenda? Those will be the first things. Now, for Kenyan context, if I can take the current government, there is so much to pro-technology, and that is one of the agenda in their manifesto to increase adoption of technology to drive the economy. So when it comes to the agriculture sector, that will be of very interest to policymakers. So there are some questions that must be answered. The alignment with the agenda of the current government, economic implication, practicability of it, and how well. First, you have to expose the policymaker to see the reality. Mostly in the agriculture sector, when we are promoting a certain innovation, we take policymaker to the site to see and understand. So if it is a technology like my farm, you have to take the policymaker to the farmers who are using it, and they see it's working, and it has a lot of impact when it is coming from the farmer explaining the use of it rather than Chris explaining.
Thank you. Sarala?
I think for us at the community level, like I said before, it's been quite challenging, especially with a certain age group who are primarily involved in the restoration activities. The take-up, although we've sort of experimented with a few apps and all that, which we didn't build, but we sort of are using, it's been a big challenge. But what happens is, I think we are also looking closely at working with the young people. The young people seem to be very, very enthusiastic about the use of technology. The uptake is much, much more higher. But definitely because the primary engagement is still with their parents, the generation above them, I think we shouldn't have technology be the divide also. So we'll have to be sort of working with the young people, but also somehow helping local communities who are mainly involved with us. For example, landowners who own parcels of land and which we are helping restore many of these places. Because the other thing, what I found is that they're so rich in the traditional knowledge, indigenous, the way they define, the way they value, and when we ask them, the way they identify trees and species, we look at it from a very technical, because I'm also an ecologist, so I look at it from an ecological perspective, ecosystem functions and services perspective, but they also have very other nuances of other system of language, the system of knowledge, which is the traditional system of knowledge, and how do we also kind of, that is their interest, so sort of combining the two knowledge systems, if we can, develop something which is of value to a certain generation of people who are primarily involved. So that has also been some sort of thinking that is going on in the organization about bringing in the other system of knowledge, and not just this the very technical knowledge, because most of our apps right now are based on these the technical system of knowledge, the scientific knowledge system. But I think somewhere if we bring also their interests, the indigenous systems, the traditional knowledge, there would be much more greater absorption. That is what I would think.
Thank you so much, Mary and Sarah. I appreciate that. So to wrap up, I would like to, first of all, thank our panelists. Oh, sorry, we have another question. Oh, yes, please, absolutely.
Don't worry, Chris, I'll not take your time much. So the question is for Chris. Before I forget, let me just, you could tell me later, but let me ask. So about the My Farm Tree app, how open is it to receive data from other data sets? Thinking about scalability and data integration.
That's a great question, because it's a question I could pass over to Anton. I'll briefly, from a layman's perspective, I would say the really great thing about the platform is it's completely permeable to data, because it uses APIs to be able to move data between any piece of information. So we're already having a lot of conversations with other platforms where we can just link directly with APIs from the My Farm Trees platform. But I don't know if Anton, you want to add anything else? No, that's fine. Okay. So if you don't know what APIs are, then we can have a conversation about it over cocktails.
Perfect. So I would like now to invite Peter Goodman, who's a senior agricultural economist in the Global Engagement Unit of the World Bank Global Department for Agriculture and Food, for some closing remarks and reflections on what we heard today. Great to have you, Peter. Welcome.
Thank you very much. So this is fantastic. This is a huge opportunity to scale up restoration. So my name is Peter Goodman, working in the Global Engagement Department of the Agriculture and Food Practice of the World Bank. And this is really interesting for us because I said it's an opportunity to scale up. And, we've talked quite a lot about this with Chris, and we'll certainly be trying to raise awareness of this with our clients across the world and with teams, and to see if there's a way we can integrate it into the investments that we fund to do this at scale. But let me say, okay, what did we hear? I mean, first we heard that we need to really understand whether restoration is in line with the priorities of the communities and the kind of nuances of whether we can use this technology, whether it works in different circumstances. That's very important, I think. So it's not just a question of us coming in with a restoration project. We need to see whether it actually meets the priorities of local communities. And actually, in relation to that, I was talking with Chris the other day about, where communities have kind of other additional priorities, whether you can actually use some of the payments to fund some of those priorities in the community. That's maybe another version of it. So huge opportunities there. We heard that the scientists are developing standards. It seems that quite with a lot of cooperation across the world in different regions to make sure that the restoration meets is a certain level of technical integrity, and that work is continuing. The other thing that really struck me about it was that this, I guess, could be applied to many other environmental outcomes. I mean, this is about gathering genetic material and maintaining genetic diversity. But if you think of a whole range of other environmental biodiversity outcomes, I guess this is a means of you could adapt this to do that. So that's also of great interest to us. I think the technology is fantastic in that it brings together the opportunity to provide the technical advice, potentially the finance, but most importantly, obviously, as a mechanism for payment in many different ways. So, I think with these restoration projects, the benefits of those restoration projects, a lot of them may be directly to the farmers themselves, but maybe they don't get them from some years down the line. So they're going to need some incentives early on to adopt. In other cases, a lot of the benefits might actually go to other people. It may go to the buyers. It may go to the downstream people who need the water, which is being stored by the trees. So there's cases where you need payments from either businesses or downstream users or the parts of government to the growers, to the farmers. So I think it helps facilitate all of those. So it's tremendous possibility. And so yeah, this is a fantastic opportunity, I think, for scaling up. And I think this will be of interest to many of the multilateral development banks and other development partners. So thank you very much. This is a very practical piece of work, I think. Very good. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter. And with that, thanks again to our panelists. Sarah, thank you for joining us at the very early hours of the morning. We appreciate your participation. And thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.